Basically, what happens is when you hit your teens, the internal parts of your brain, which do all the housekeeping and maintenance, they say, okay, we got all this. How much of this is actually necessary, and how much we get rid of to make things run smoother? You have a stronger urge to, a stronger liking for risk, because, you have increased fondness for it, but not a corresponding increased awareness of what it means. So your emotion system gets upgraded pretty early on, whereas your ability to control these emotions is still catching up. The brain's saying, no, we must become a different person. We must become an individual. And I don't know if I'm doing it right unless other people agree. Therefore, I need to have acceptance from others and approval. And I need to be popular, or at least recognized or respected or liked. The parts of your brain which process physical pain, the bits next to them, being rejected, triggers those. So it does cause deep discomfort. So your brain as a teenager is its own type of brain. It's not like a child's brain, it's not an adult brain, it is a teenager's brain, which has its own thing going on.
What makes the teenage brain fundamentally different from the adult brain? Hello, I'm Avnish, and this is The Early Perspective. Each episode, we explore how the brain works and what that means for how we learn, think, and live. This episode is going to be the final part of our 3-part series with Dr. Burnett. He is a neuroscientist and the best-selling author whose work sits at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and public communication. In addition to his research background, he has held a variety of roles, including a psychiatry lecturer, research fellow, science blogger, comedian, comedy writer, and cadaver involvement. Renowned for his fun, accessible approach to neuroscience, Dr. Burnett has written many global bestsellers such as The Idiot Brain and The Happy Brain. His writing is widely used and recommended by educational institutions, mental health charities, and clinical practitioners for its clarity, accuracy, and its very engaging style. In the first 2 episodes of our series, we've explored how sleep, stress, habits, and addiction shape the brain. Today, we're going to be stepping back in order to focus on the teenage brain, what makes it unique, how it develops, and also why it can be especially sensitive to social pressure. Dr. Burnett, welcome again.
Thank you for having me yet again. Thought it'd be bored of me by now, but here we are, nonetheless.
Okay, so let's just get straight into it. Let's ground this biologically. What makes the teenage brain fundamentally different from the adult brain? How is my brain completely different from yours?
Well, for many reasons, I think. But I think it's like even more pertinent to say how is it different from both children, teenagers, and mature adults. Mature as in fully grown, not kids or childish. But it's okay. So when you are born, from like then until this onset of your teenage years, you've got a child's brain and it's constantly absorbing. It doesn't know anything about anything really. Everything's a learning experience. Young children tend to pick up things really quickly, really well. Every time you remember something, a new connection is being laid down in the brain. So like new connections forming, and so those build up over time. And if you see like a section of brain tissue from a 10-year-old brain, very dense, very, very tangled, very sort of really intertwined with all sorts of other things. But when you take, when puberty starts happening, adolescence initiates, things start changing. So a lot of those connections are lost because although it's good to know things and absorb things and learn things, the brain is also, like I've said in previous episodes, it's always running at a maximum. So like, efficiency is what defines how well a brain operates. And if you've got every single memory you've ever had stored in there, it takes up a lot of space, absorbs a lot of resources in ways which can be compromising. So basically what happens is when you hit your teens, the internal parts of your brain, which do all the housekeeping and maintenance, they say, okay, we got all this. How much of this is actually necessary, and how much we get rid of to make things run smoother? So it's probably like the same, like if you've got an old smartphone of yours, you think it's running slowly, like, okay, how many apps I got in here? Like scrolling through the home screen, 20 pages, like 15 screens later. Oh, this is loads. I don't need all this. Just get rid of that, get rid of that. And that's what you're doing. Your brain starts doing that, saying, okay, don't need that, don't need this. What's this for? Why do I even keep this? Or like decluttering, essentially, to make the brain more efficient for adult life. And that's what's happening when you're a teenager. Obviously, you've got all the physical changes happening too, like your body's changing in so many different ways, but your brain's changing too. And as I said, the episode about sleep, that means you need more sleep because sleep is when your brain does all the maintenance and housekeeping and updating and filing. And when you're a teenager, it needs to do a lot more because I think in previous episodes I likened it to when you're asleep, it's like the library takes an order of new books and sorts them out. And this way, like the library's also been extended, like new shelves have been added, some have been thrown out, so it's doing maintenance twice over. So you need more sleep at different times and stuff. So yeah, so your brain's always changing in this regard. Your brain, every part of your brain is becoming more efficient, more well structured in that respect for independence, for adult life, because you want to get to a point where you don't need anyone else to look after you anymore. You are an independent individual now. Great, all good, but obviously it's your brain. It's absorbed millions upon millions and millions of millions, billions, trillions of connections. It takes a while to go through all those. You say like, okay, so I need to know parents' name, where I live, my face, all stuff like that. But like, do I need to remember the 7 a.m. drive to a supermarket on a wet February weekend when I was like 6 years old? I don't need that. That's irrelevant. So it's got to go through all that. So it takes time, and like that's why adolescence lasts so many years. It does, and all the different parts of the brain are being upgraded, like sort of being updated in real time while still working, which is sort of like trying to fix a road while cars are still on it. So that takes longer, obviously, and therefore the adolescence lasts a long time. There's no real. We still don't know when it totally finishes. Like recent studies said, it actually stops in your mid-30s, really, in terms of this brain development. Obviously, physically, you stop a lot earlier. This also throws up a few problems too, in that different parts of your brain are, the fundamental inner parts are quite simple and primal, and the extremely advanced higher brain is complex. So that takes longer to upgrade and develop, and therefore your brain matures at different parts mature at different times, which causes all the emotional and mental upheaval of your teenage years. So it's your brain constantly figuring itself out over and over and over again, and that's why your teen years can be quite can be emotional, should we say, for want of a better term.
And so you're saying that all of these changes and your brain constantly trying to update its parts is leading to the more emotional aspect, and also like how teenagers are more foolhardy in general.
Part of it, yeah. I mean, it has some strange knock-on effects. Parents find it confusing because obviously parents have been raising their kids, and parents are adults with an old brain, a finished brain, shall we say? And I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean that's sort of like stuck, as in like, oh, I'm not doing this again. So like they've had 10, 11 years of like, this is how kids work. Me and my child have this relationship, and they behave like this. They hit their teens. Okay, this is totally unprecedented. I know what this is. Stop that. And therefore they get confused because they've got an old brain which struggles to keep up. So that's part of it as well. But yeah, it's so the parts of your brain which like recognize risk, those are the higher parts of your brain, like the ones which are analytical, thinking, the complex ones. So they take longer to develop. The parts of your brain which like risk are like those sort of immediate rewards. Those are the more emotional, older, primitive parts of your brain, like the ones we share more with our chimp cousins and things like that. So they've been upgraded, and the parts of your brain which are responsible for dealing with risk haven't. So you have a stronger urge to, a stronger liking for risk, because like, you have increased fondness for it, but not a corresponding increased awareness of what it means. Because I do worry about saying this sort of thing, because a lot of adults say it to say like, oh, kids are foolhardy or teens are just destructive. You can still analyze risk, and you can still recognize it and not follow through in it. Like most teens don't throw themselves off cliffs thinking they could fly. That's not a thing that happens, because they can do that. You are still very logical, rational beings. It's just that the risk has like a higher emotional impact, and the ability to process it is slightly less than a grizzled old adult like me, who doesn't have any fun at all. So you can still do it fine. Teenagers do study, you pass exams, you do all the stuff that adults expect you to do. You just do it whilst dealing with more emotions. You're playing on a harder setting in terms of like basic logical stuff, because your brain isn't at that point yet, but you can do it. And I think it annoys me when people say, oh, teens, the whole thing about Your brain only finishes developing when you're 25. Therefore, if you're under 25, you shouldn't have any responsibilities, or you shouldn't be blamed for anything, or you shouldn't be trusted with anything. That's all complete nonsense. First off,
Mhm.
the 25 years thing comes from a study which just studied people up to 25 years old. It didn't mean that's the cutoff point. That was the oldest subject. So, okay, well, it's like saying, well, Usain Bolt, you can only run 100 meters. Well, no, I'm sure you can go a bit further if you wanted to. That's just when the race ends. But it's also like saying, like a giant redwood can grow to 60 meters tall, typically. But you wouldn't say to a 30-meter tall giant redwood, that's not a real tree. It clearly is. It's massive. It's a fully functional tree. It just hasn't finished growing yet. It will get bigger, but it's also already quite impressive. And that's sort of my stance of the teen brain. Yeah, if anything, it's more impressive because you're dealing with a lot of other stuff and doing all the adult stuff you're expected to do, and have none of the responsibilities or trust you should have. So yeah, it's sorry, I get a bit animated. It's a bugbear of mine. So but yeah, it is like you different parts of your brain mature at different times, and it can be confusing to adults. The pleasure center, which we discussed in a previous episode, the emotions that stem from that, they get upgraded in its maturing quite early because they're quite primitive, quite sort of old school, and therefore, then that means they need advanced stimulation. So when you hit your teens, the things that made you happy when you're a kid, you got pleasure from your teddy bears or your kids' games, suddenly don't have the same impact because your brain's going, well, I know what this is. This is boring now. I need new stimulation. I need new. It's like trying to, it's like back when I was young, VHS tapes were the cutting edge. But if you took a VHS tape and digitized it, uploaded YouTube now on a full 4K screen, it would look awful because everything's been upgraded since. And what was once impressive is not anymore. The same with your brain and pleasure stuff. So I used to like that, but now I've got a brain which operates on a higher level, so I don't need that anymore. So I've got fondness for it. I got good memories, but it doesn't have the same impact as it once did. So yeah, so there's a lot going on in there. Anyway, so again, like I say, a bugbear. I tend to be quite vocal about this sort of thing.
So I know you mentioned that different parts of the brain mature at different times. So what's really taking the longest? What matures the last in the brain?
Well, that's definitely prefrontal cortex stuff, the most advanced intellectual parts of the brain, because they are the parts which make us human, really. Like they are parts, like the whole thing about self-awareness, self-control, introspection, language, thought, processing, analysis, simulation, thinking about things, scenarios. These are all things we humans can do with our mighty brains, which most of the species, as far as we can see, can't. But they're the most recently evolved parts of the brain, like the last million years or so, which is quite recent in evolutionary terms. But as I said in the previous episode, that makes them the most sophisticated, the most intricate, the most complex. So it takes a lot longer for them to be upgraded. So it's where's if you had an abacus, you could just get put some new balls on it. Yeah, that's fine. That's fixed. That's new. If you've got a calculator, that's okay. You have to get in there, readdress the circuits, clean things off. Whereas your frontal lobes is like a smartphone. Is I'm going to have to get some programming going on here. I've got to go in there, got to debug everything. So the higher the levels of the brain, the more complex they are, the longer it takes to sort of update them, because there's a lot more to do in that respect.
And of course, it takes different times to get this kind of update amongst different teenagers. So what's causing this variability that some teenagers are much more mature, have much more developed prefrontal cortexes compared to others?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a thing of some of it would just be just luck of the draw, just genetics. Some people have
Mm-hmm.
faster development because that's the way the dice rolled for them. I always say when it comes to brain development, it's like you got 6 million dice in your hand and just roll them, and everyone's going to have a sort of similar score, really. But some people will have a lot more sixes, and some people have a lot more ones, and that'll
Mm-hmm.
impact you going long term. But it's just how it is. We are a variable species, and biology is never going to be perfect. That's good. That's how we evolve. That's how we change. So diversity is really important. But yeah, that's nature. But as everyone knows, nurture is just as big a part. So some people will have had lives which have required them to mature faster. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. There's a really old school model, today's stages of development, which argue that before age 9 you can only have like complete concrete concepts, and after that you can have basic, like you can understand maths and stuff, and then after that you can understand like other people's inner lives. From like 15 onwards, then you're fully developed. He argued that from 12 onwards you can only, that's the only time you can do like complex maths in your brain. But then that was like the dominant model for a long time in like wealthy Western culture. And then someone points out that, if you go to Africa, there's 9-year-olds running shops and stuff because like they work their parents' business because they just can, because they've been asked to or expected to, and they just do it. So yeah, if you've had a sort of background or life where you've been expected to do things and you figure them out, then you can do them. So some people will be very, very mature at age 10 because they may have, saying diplomatically, may have less than ideal parents, so they've had to step up for their younger siblings or just sort of keep the house in some sort of shape. So you can get some extremely mature 11-year-olds, whereas some people who have extremely pampered lives, they could be in their 80s and never move beyond the screaming child. Again, mentioning no names, but I think we all know where our head went there. but yeah, so it very much is like an experience factor. And if you are made to do things, your brain will go, okay, I need to figure out how to do that, and it'll do it. If it's got the flexibility and the enough development to do it, and that'll be a lesson it learns. Some people are very mature at a very young age. Some people are very mature at a very late age because they have had to do things in a certain order, and that has had a lasting effect on them.
So both nature and nurture, and of course, multitude of factors involved in that affect how people's prefrontal cortex and just their maturity in general develops, right? But then, is this lack of development in the prefrontal cortex and this lack of maturity gonna predispose teenagers to get addicted or start bad habits in general?
It is a particularly vulnerable time. Yeah, it's not like saying it's inevitable, because I don't like to like. It's the odds are higher. Again, you got to keep it in perspective. It's like same as saying like when you're in your teens, that's when you're most vulnerable to mental health problems. But it's a case of like, whereas the average person, the average adult would be like 1 in 100 is likely to develop a particular mental health problem. During adolescence, it's like 4 in 100. Still a small number, but a lot more than relatively.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So when you're a teen, you are more vulnerable to stuff because, especially when a lot of mental health or well-being is tied to emotions, and when you're a teenager, your emotions are like as powerful as they'll ever be. I know what you say when you're a child and stuff, but you're still figuring them out. Then you're still like, okay, I feel this, I do that. But eventually, your consciousness, your rational mind, sort of develops to the point where, okay, I understand how things work now. When you're a teenager, like I say, the parts of your brain which produce emotions are more fundamental, more primal, and therefore simpler than the parts of your brain which regulate and control emotions, usually. So your emotion system gets upgraded pretty early on, whereas your ability to control these emotions is still catching up. So when you're a teenager, you have like these very powerful emotional experiences. And you can sort of see this in the data. Like most people still say that the best music is the music they had when they were teens. Like loads of guys my age insist like the 90s era, that was the best music. Guys that were 10 years older than me insist it was the 80s, and then all of them was, you can sort of see the pattern there.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's not like music was better or worse then. You could argue yes or no. I mean, there's lots of data about that, but this was the music you listened to when you were in your teens, when you were at your physical peak. You were as fit as you'll ever be, fit and beautiful as you'll ever be. You had not as much responsibility as you do now, and you were more responsive to emotions. And the music does trigger powerful emotions. The stuff you listen to when you're a teenager, like that'll trigger you to experience emotional reactions like nothing else will later on. Well, some things will, but it'll be like more specific. It'll be rarer. So obviously, in 30 years' time, we'll have a bunch of like 40-year-olds saying Taylor Swift was the greatest artist ever, and like insisting still that she was like iconic. I'm sure she is, but it'll be weird from my perspective to see people like that. Like I remember that there being one thing for kids. Now all you guys with grey hair, The Swifties have got old, and that's going to be quite an interesting thing to see. So yeah, that's sort of like, when we have our teenage brains in our heads, emotions tend to hit us a lot harder, and that can be good and bad, but it is a thing. So yeah.
And then does this same idea of that emotions are so strong in this time that childhood trauma is particularly important here, that it just sticks more?
Yeah, I mean, childhood trauma can easily have an impact on you the rest of your life, because not just because it's trauma, but because you're a child. Because remember, when you're a child, that's when your brain's first learning things. Like, so, like your entire identity is basically layer upon layer upon layer of experience and learning from your life. So the things that go in first or very early on, like, they underlie everything that comes after it. I think there's some studies which show that age 4 is a particularly key age for long-term consequences. I think it's because that's when your brain is finally at the point where it can actually sustain or like produce long-term memories reliably. So it's like until age 3, like your brain's like packing the car. Okay, so got all this stuff, double check, that sort of thing. At age 4, you've set off. So from this point on, what you've packed is like, well, you can't go back now. This is what you've got. So from then on, like, you can make stops, you can take things off, unload, reload, all that sort of stuff, but you can't go back. Age 4 is particularly key for this sort of thing, and that has consequences, obviously, because if you have a negative life experience before age 4 or at age 4, it'll have more long-term consequences as a result of that. But yeah, so like when you're a child, you are learning how the world works. And if that learning involves a lot of negative stuff or trauma, then that will inform your worldview about your basis around which you understand things in life from then on. And it's not like completely permanent, because
Yeah,
later learning can override older learning. But when it's something quite
right.
significant and fundamental like that, it can be a lot harder to overcome that. So that's why, people will go to a therapist in their 50s and unpick something which happened when they were like 9, because like, oh, that's been bothering me this entire time. And because when you're a kid, the problem is you don't know it's abnormal, because to you it isn't. It's just, this is how life is. That's when you meet other people, interact with them and the world around you, which isn't based around this negative life experience, and you
Yeah,
realize something is amiss. So yeah, that's why it can have such long-term impacts on people.
right. Yeah, that really explains a lot, because especially childhood trauma tends to almost define many people's identities and shapes their
Totally, yeah.
entire like experience and path forward. Okay, and then so I was thinking about pivoting to more social pressure and influence for teens. Of course, their emotions are more active and stronger, as we were talking about. But then this also makes them, I guess, more susceptible to social influence and pressure. Like, for example, peer pressure. Take an example of any teen movie focused in high school, you'll see peer pressure all the time. And then
Absolutely,
even
yeah.
in my personal experience, I saw that I felt compelled to fit into the norm, not stand out, and not to be labeled as really different by others. So why does peer approval really matter so much during the teenage time?
Yeah, it's a big issue, and that is actually really quite. It always gets to the heart of the matter. Like, I think I mentioned in the previous episode that humans are an ultra social species. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we define ourselves by our interaction with other people. That's how we calibrate our sense of worth, our sense of self, our identity, and so on. So like, other people are so important to the human brain. That's how we understand everything, basically. Like, that's why it's like, you can show someone reams and reams and books full of hard data saying this is the case, but someone else saying, but a friend of mine said it's not. See, these other people have such an outsized impact on how we understand everything. As a scientist, it can be quite annoying, but we get by. But yeah, when you're a teen specifically, like, it's been noticed in every social species almost, including rats. Much smaller, much more primitive, but still a social species. They live together in groups. The adolescents tend to wander off. Like, they separate themselves from the established norms. Just like I said earlier on, like, your brain's updating, it's got all this new, it wants new things, new stuff, new experiences. And what it also wants is a new sort of social framework. So when you're a kid, up to age 11, say 11, 12, adolescence kicks in, your parents and you have a very strict, very set relationship. They are the providers and caregivers, and they are the authority. You are the provided for. You obey. They command. It's not as strict as that. But you know what I mean? Like that's sort of that's the arrangement. It's very much a them up, you down. And when you're hit adolescence, you want to form your own identity. And the whole thing about I want new things that includes your social relationship with your parents. Like, yeah, it used to be that you were in charge of me. Now I want to have my own life, so I want to renegotiate this. I want to sort of like we need a new setup. Parents with a much older brains don't like that. It's no, this is how it works. I am old. I know. Trust me. So like teenagers tend to be rebellious because their brains say, no, I need independence. I need autonomy. I need control. I have all this new stuff in my head. I need to express and exercise that. So when you sort of try to disentangle yourself from your parents as like a most meaningful relationship, you want to form your own new relationships and connections, which usually happens with your peers. Okay, so like I was my parents' child. Like I was their subordinate. Again, a bit too harsh, but you know what I mean. But now I need to be an individual, and for that I need to speak to other individuals on my level. Your brain's thinking, I need peers. I need peer approval. I need people to like me and recognize me and respect me and acknowledge that I am doing okay. Because that's what your brain needs to be sort of validated what you're doing. So peer approval becomes so important when you're a teenager because you are forming a new identity away from your parents. Your brain's saying, no, we must become a different person. We must become an individual. And I don't know if I'm doing it right unless other people agree. Therefore, I need to have acceptance from others and approval, and I need to be popular or at least recognized or respected or liked by people around me who are doing the same thing. Because my parents, I know what they do. They say, yes, of course, you're the most handsome boy in school. Like, shut up, mum. you know I'm not, but thank you for your support. But come on, let's be real here. But it's like you know what they do. Like they're very, very familiar. And when you're an adolescent, you need the new, you need the novel, and that includes your relationship. Yeah, it's a fundamental thing to need and want the peer approval when you're entering adolescence because you are trying to create a whole new identity. And for that to work, you need feedback and you need approval. And therefore, peer approval is fundamentally really important when you're a teenager.
So why does this change over time? Like as you get older and older, having the need to find peer approval diminishes. Of course, it doesn't completely fade, but then it gets lower. It gets significantly less over time.
Yeah, well, over time, your brain does like develop and mature, and therefore you get to the point where, okay, this is my identity now. I think I'm set with this. I like who I am, or at least I'm content with who I am. Or at least your brain doesn't keep changing so much. Like, oh, I guess this is who I am. Whatever you land on, like it's like, okay, I've done that, so that's good. But also, bear in mind, your peers are also going through the exact same thing you are. So all they are having the same internal chaos that you're experiencing when you're a teenager. So they're going to be giving you mixed messages too. Obviously, what's popular in school is very different depending on who you talk to. Because like, there's no sort of like, it's not uniform, is it? Like when I was in school myself, like I was one of the dweeby kids, believe it or not. But don't gasp so loudly. But you know, like there's cliques in this. The popular kids, there's the weird kids, there's the sporty kids, there's the science kids, all that sort of stuff. Because what counts as good or what counts as a right way to be will vary massively from person to person. So you might have like, you know, at age 13, like, oh, all my friends, like I have 50 friends who all think I'm great. And then by 14 is half of these guys are weird. I'm not sure I like them. Some of these are gossipy, some of these like quite cynical, some are quite insulting. You know, it's always in flux. So once you get to 18, 19, you are literally out in the world on your own. You can't keep doing that. It's like physically impossible to sustain that. Now you are an individual adult, a mature person who, okay, like I can't. It's almost like your brain saying, like, okay, I've done that. I've arrived at this result, which I'm quite happy with. I can't keep doing this. I can't just keep changing again and again based on the feedback from others. That's a sign of a very insecure person, someone who can't actually respect themselves or like just assert themselves. Like, I am me. This is who I am. That's okay. That's a sign of a healthy mindset. You know, where some people who can't do that is usually the sign of something a bit more, you know, bit more negative going on beneath the surface. So yeah, eventually our brain just goes, okay, I've done that. I can't keep doing this, otherwise I'm never gonna know anything. I'm just going to be a constant like chimera of shifting loyalties and emotions, and that's not sustainable either. So yeah, once we've gone through the process, we're like, okay, I've learned all that. I'm done. This is who I am. World,
Yeah.
deal. I know, and sometimes that's you just have to say that. You know.
So then you're basically saying that after a certain while, your brain realizes that it needs to finally just set down its roots and then stop trying to constantly seek social validation, right?
Yeah, totally. At some point, like it's also hard to sustain. Like having an interpersonal relationship. Like there's Dunbar's number. Like it's like the idea that we can only sustain because every relationship we have in our head takes up brain space. You know, every relationship we have is something which occupies our brain. So we can only it varies from person to person or model to model. The idea that we can only sustain like 150 relationships with other people. And obviously, social media has changed that completely because it's a lot easier to do that now because you can do it like en masse in bulk, which that's a whole other thing. But you know, in terms of interpersonal, we can be connected to let's say 150 people, but of those 150, a lot will be just like casual acquaintances or people you recognize or co-workers or old school friends, whatever. Whereas you have like at most like two or three hardcore friends, you know, because every time you have a deep intimate relationship, it takes up even more brain space. Like you run in a much more detailed simulation. This is my best friend ever. I know exactly what they think in every situation. I know how they'd react. I know what they like. I know what they would do. I know who they are. I know if I was thinking. So they take up a lot more brain space. So we can only sustain like two or three deeply fundamental personal relationships like that. Like that's when, yeah, like I know people like you know, in the modern era, like polyamory is quite popular and like open relationships and stuff. But we never be completely meaningful with everyone. Like we'd still default to monogamy because it just takes up so much brain space having someone that intimately involved in your life, like where they become a big part of your existence, and the brain power needed to sustain that is quite incredible. Like there's an argument that's why we have such big brains in the first place, because we needed to maintain social relationships. Like birds are monogamous, a lot of birds, and they have much bigger brains than similarly sized species because understanding that you have another individual who is a big part of your internal life requires a lot of brain power, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. And then another thing was, which is very important to teenagers especially, is social embarrassment and rejection. I was reading one of your blogs, which is about this, and then you talked about how social anxiety and embarrassment sometimes feel physically painful, and these are like phobias that are developed over time, and it's activating the same stress responses. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, social phobias are the most common phobias in the human experience, or at least in the medical text. So, therefore, they are the most common anxiety disorders. So, that's quite a profound thing to be able to say. But humans are very, very, very sensitive to rejection. I said, like, we love approval. We need other people's approval around us, which means we are deeply sensitive to not getting it or to actively having it taken away from us. And that's even like a survival thing. We can see how that evolved from a time when we were tribal species, groups of people living in the wilds, the African savannas. And humans aren't the most physically impressive species. Like we're not the strongest or fastest. We haven't got the biggest fangs or muscles or armor. But we collaborate. When there's 20 other guys that are only with spears, you haven't got to be afraid, which is great, But which means if the tribe rejects you, it's almost like a death. It was a death sentence back for a lot of our time of our species. So, yeah, our brains learned that don't get rejected. You could die. That's a very profound lesson to absorb, And therefore, we find it really, really hard to be rejected. Some studies show it does actually cause psychological pain, not like physical pain, but the parts of your brain which process physical pain, the bits next to them, being rejected triggers those. So, like it does cause deep discomfort. Again, some studies show that can happen to anyone. There are like they took African American subjects and gave them a virtual scenario where they were rejected by people who were told were members of the Ku Klux Klan. Anyone who's African American would want to be actively opposed to the Ku Klux Klan. Like, I don't want you guys in my life at all, clearly, because you are anathema to my very existence. But if it was like made to play a virtual game and these guys rejected them, they experienced the pain of rejection, even though they actually wanted to be, consciously wanted it, but subconsciously the brain just doesn't like it, whoever it is. Even like complete strangers who don't say thank you after you open the door for them, like that doesn't hurt. It's not nice. We object to that happening. So we are extremely socially sensitive to rejection, and particularly when you're a teenager, when social approval, peer approval means so much to you, social rejection means so much worse, and therefore embarrassment is so much more profound. Like I still have, like everyone does it, the whole thing of, you walk in the street and suddenly you think of a memory from your teenage years, like, oh, how embarrassing! And like you sort of want to crawl inside yourself and just disappear into the center of the earth. But odds are, no one around you at the time even remembers it. It was just you who thought, like, oh, I did a thing which could have caused me to be rejected. Actually mortifying. Or the people you spoke to or did something in front of, they don't remember it at all. It didn't mean anything to them, but you thought it could be embarrassing. Therefore, it's so significant to you when your emotions are so high and your ability to process them they're not caught up yet. So yeah, like social rejection is profoundly significant to the human brain, especially when you're a teenager, and all the effects that will have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially your example of remembering this stuff from years ago really resonated with me, because I think about this time in 7th grade when I was like up on the stage giving a speech on something, and then I messed up a couple words, forgot what I was gonna say. I know for a fact nobody in the audience would remember any of that, but I think about that all the time. So is that really just a way of your brain just trying to prevent it? So then is that why you constantly try to think about it? Or what's the idea of your brain just going back to that event?
Yeah, it's a simulation thing. Like one thing our brains do, which is really useful and makes them really powerful. Like it comes up the whole what if scenarios. Like we don't have to learn by doing for everything. We think, okay, what if I did this? That would be bad. Let's not do that. Like the idea of doing something embarrassing is like fundamentally off-putting. Even just an idea. It hasn't happened. It'll never happen. But thinking, what if I did this? Like, you just cringe into yourself, and then you start to go, you just claw your own skin off because, like, oh, can you imagine doing that? You can imagine it, but you're not going to do it because this is the reaction you have to a theoretical scenario, and the brain's always doing that. That's where you get intrusive thoughts from. The whole classic intrusive thoughts, like, what if I'm stood next to a train platform? What if I just push this person off? I'm not going to do that, but what if I did? Because your brain's always like thinking, what if? Like, rather than have to do stuff and learn things, how about I just think about it, simulate it, and see how I feel about that? So, like, I think, what if I push this person off? That'd be awful. I won't do that. It's like exploring the parameters of your of an island, and then getting to electric fence, like going go close, going oh, probably shouldn't touch that. But you want to know what the boundaries are. Like, you want to know, because that teaches you how the world works. So we always have these dark thoughts of, what if I did this? What if I did that? Yeah, I shouldn't do that. Yeah, I shouldn't do that. But it's really quite common. Like, people think they're weird. They're not. They're just how the human brain is. Like, let's test the boundaries, or let's see where things lie. And like the embarrassment works in that same way as well. Like, oh, remember I did that? And like, yeah, you did that. Don't do that again. Like, so, like, remember, don't do that again. Remember how bad that was? Don't do it again. Like, so it's your brain constantly reinforcing the lesson. And there's even like stuff like adolescent crushes. Like, they're quite a sort of like a sitcom stereotype, of like a girl or boy who's just absolutely obsessed with this one person they never met and stuff. Yeah, it's a thing. It happens. One of the theories is that it's an evolved thing to happen, because when you have like an adolescent crush on someone, you create a whole mental relationship with them. Like, it's like, oh, they would do this and I would do that and I would do that. But that's like a way of practicing, rehearsing for actual romantic relationships. They have to do them. Because if you can imagine having like a intimate relationship with someone you never even thought about it, it would be so wildly inefficient and, to say, disastrous. So it gives your brain like a chance to simulate and run through ideas and scenarios, which is why like an adolescent crush very rarely ever survives contact with the person they have a crush on. It's like, I've got these ideas about you, like, you're nothing like what I thought. Oh God, and they just move on. So it's basically it's your brain rehearsing for real life, and that in a way which is, there's less consequential than actually doing it. So, it's good, but it's unpleasant when you're going through it yourself.
So then what about something like secondhand embarrassment, that where you're actually embarrassed that somebody else is doing something, like for example, your family, and then you see that and you start cringing at that?
Yeah, that's the empathy thing. Human beings are really good. Again, our brains are better than technology, way better at detecting emotions in other people. And we can share emotions. So if someone looks sad, you feel a bit of sadness yourself. And that's actually one of our weird superpowers we have. And we can even do it without realizing. Like you might have done this yourself, but you walk into a room where two people just had a huge argument and they just sort of cooled down. You walk in, like you haven't got a clue about this, you don't witness any of it. You walk in and like, oh, it feels really cold in here. What's going on? Like you just detect the signals of everyone's body language, or like, okay, something bad happened. What is it? Like you don't know, you weren't there, but you know, subconsciously. So we're really good at that anyway. But because we simulate, because we empathize, when someone else does something embarrassing, we can't help but sort of like simulate. Okay, what if I did this? Also, what if other people saw this and thought I was connected? How would they react? And then your brain just runs off in these directions, going, oh yeah, like Uncle Bob said that word that no one's allowed to say anymore. Now everyone's going to look at me because they think I taught it. I didn't taught that. So it becomes your brain just goes, oh God, like your brain's running through all the scenarios, going, okay, how bad could this get? Essentially, how bad could this get, and what can I do about it? And that's what happens. Like you go, oh God, no, don't. Like I get it terribly. I can't watch certain sitcoms. Like I just get second embarrassment so badly from someone else who's a fictional character. It might be funny, but I can't actually enjoy it because I'm just too painfully aware of what that person is doing. So yeah, it can be a bit of a hindrance, but it is what it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah. So this overthinking in teenagers is leading to the kind of spotlight effect on them being amplified a lot, right?
Mm. Yeah, because like, you become self-fulfilling, don't you?
Yeah.
You're so desperate to not be embarrassed, you overthink everything, and therefore you don't behave normally. And before you become embarrassed because I must blend in with everyone. I must extremely blend in. You look weird. Yeah, it can be so sort of because obviously you're still young, you haven't figured out how this works yet. No one else knows either. So sometimes it is trial and error, but wish it wasn't, but I'm afraid it is.
Okay, great. So before we wrap up, I just had two more questions. What's one thing that you think teenagers should understand about their own brains?
I think most of what I said already is that no, your brain is different to your parents and the younger people in your life, like children. You are your own distinct level of brain development, and I think, I know because it's been said so many times that teenagers are sort of treated as like a mix of adult and child, almost like the worst of both worlds. You are still a child; you can't be trusted with this, this, and this, but you're old enough now, so you must do responsibility, 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 and that is deeply frustrating. And I can understand why teens get so annoyed and angry about that because it is really, really logically it must be. I remember, and I know I'm in my 40s, but I remember being that teenager being told, like, in school, these exams are the most important things you'll ever do. They define your entire life. You must get good marks. You must get good marks, or you are doomed. And like, all right, I guess I better try. So I did get good marks. I'm a doctor now. I think that sort of speaks for itself. Sort of most people in my year that year, like my cohort that year, like exam results in schools in the UK were like the highest ever for another year, or 5 years in a row. And like, oh, everyone's quite proud. And they turn on the news, like literally that day, exam results were announced in the morning, in the afternoon. Turn on the TV. First thing you see is some 70-year-old politician going, "Well, exams are getting easier, aren't they?" So like you just told every kid in the country that they must study or they are doomed. And they did that. And as soon as they did that, you move the goalposts again. Like it's so annoying. It's so frustrating. Like, but it's also like, yeah, they're adults. They should be studying hard. Shut up. Stop it. Stop talking. But yeah. So your brain as a teenager is its own type of brain. It's not like a child's brain. It's not an adult brain. It's a teenager's brain, which has its
Mhm.
own thing going on. And I think when you understand that, that can be a lot more helpful. And I wish more adults appreciated that too. So yes.
Yeah, and then building off of that, what's the biggest thing that adults should stop misinterpreting about teenage brains?
Yeah, it's the teenage brains in general, like the way their brains work means they need independence, they need autonomy, because that's how you figure out how to be an adult. And because like parents like myself have spent so long building up this dynamic of I parent in charge, you child, do as you're told, and our brains are so much more inflexible, we don't adjust to changes very rapidly, whereas teenagers do, because their brains are like constantly in flux. They handle changes way better than anyone else does. And I think we sort of think like, oh, they're being disrespectful. No, they need independence. This is a natural part of life. It's how we've evolved. If anything, you could argue that teenagers are the reason humans succeed in the first place, because when you have like a setup and a tribe, everyone knows their place, everyone does their own thing, everyone knows where everything is. That's fine, but if the environment changes, that leads to extinction. Like, okay, so our food is gone. What do we do? I don't know. Die. But if you've got a part of the population which is always going, I'm in my physical prime, I'm going to wander off and do something else. The hell with you lot. And that helps us expand, helps us like widen the gene pool and things like that. Sure. Adolescents are like the key to our success. And I think teenagers should be saying, you're welcome a lot more. But yeah, so like it's it's an important part of development. A lot of studies say that the best parent-teen relationships are the ones which treat it not as defiance or disrespect. It's like, no, this is a renegotiation. Okay, so our relationship was this, it worked until now. Now you need something different. Okay, so what do you need? What can I give you? What should I not give you? Because you are still very young, and I'm still the adult here who has gone through this, so I know what's what. So like, what's going on there? And adults should remember that this is a bit of a curveball thrown last minute, but there's a thing called the fade in affect bias, which means that negative memories fade faster than good ones. You still have the information, but the whole negative emotional impact, like you think of something makes you cry or makes you angry, that goes away faster than the things that make you happy, make you cheerful, like fond memories. The brain is a bias. The negative ones go away faster because it's how we get over trauma. Like time heals all wounds, as they say. It happens to adults too. So the older you get as an adult, the further back your memories go, the more positive they will be. So most adults remember their teenage years fondly, and they don't remember all this bad stuff which happens, all the turmoil, all the stress, all the confusion. So like parents say, oh, when I was your age, I was happy. You weren't. You just don't remember being unhappy. And therefore, when parents tell you, like, as if something's wrong with you, no, something's wrong with them. They've just forgotten the important bits. You're a normal teenager. They're a weird adult. So helpful to remember that, I think.
Okay, great. Dr. Burnett, thank you so much for helping explain why the teenage brain isn't just broken. It's really just under construction.
No.
Also, just thank you for joining me on this 3-episode journey.
That's been fun, man. Always good. Do it again sometime.
So for listeners, if you found a different perspective on the behavior of teenagers and how their brain is just fundamentally different from adults, share it with somebody who might benefit from that too. If you guys enjoyed this episode and learned something new, make sure to follow on your favorite podcasting platform or on YouTube. I'm Avnish, this is The Early Perspective, and I'll see you in the next episode.